We're glad you decided to check out this message by Seabreeze Church and hope that you benefit from it. We also hope that you would join us either online or in person on a Sunday. We have a 9 o'clock live streamed service online, and then we have in-person services on our campus at 9 and 10:30. So again, we hope that you would join us, and we hope that you enjoy this message.
Good morning. It's good to see you all today. As Dale said, my name is Ethan. I am the family pastor here, and we are in the final message of a series called Limited Resources. In this series, if you've been with us, you know we're looking at some of the key resources that God gives us, that He entrusts to us in limited amounts. We're asking how we can make the most of those, use them according to what He wants us to do with them. So we started off by looking at time. We saw that, we've all got limited time. We looked at how we can use that. We also considered the resource of our physical bodies, the bodies that allow us to exist and operate on that timeline. And we also looked at our stuff. We looked at our possessions and our money that require our attention. One thing that all of these have in common is that they are all temporary. They're all temporary. Our bodies, we know, they're going to fade. There's no question. We kind of feel it. Our bodies they're going to fade, and when they do, our time on this earth resource will come to an abrupt end. And at that same time, our stuff is no longer going to be of use to us. But the resource that we're going to look at today is different. We're going to look at influence. This is the mark that we leave on people. This is an interesting resource. It's something that can grow over time. You can increase in your influence, and it can also shrink over time, or it can shrink abruptly, all at once. But because it deals with people who are loved by God, people who are created by God to exist for eternity, this is the most valuable of the resources, the most valuable thing that God could entrust to us. Now, when I was 8 years old, my dad and his brother took me to Discovery Zone. I don't know if you remember these. I don't think they're around anymore. I'm not sure if they're in Orange County. Basically, they were giant McDonald's play places. So it was kind of heaven to be there as an 8-year-old. I think they went under when trampoline parks were discovered in the early 2000s. It's tough to compete with trampoline parks. But they took me to Discovery Zone, and there's this giant slide there. And my dad and my uncle, they said, "Hey, Ethan, I bet you can't make it to the top of that slide, like going up the wrong way." So I was like, well, I think I could, but I'm not allowed to. It's very clear. The Discovery Zone rules are well known among 8-year-olds at the time. And so I knew I wasn't allowed to go up the slide. But they pushed back. They reassured me. They said, it's going to be fine. Just do it. Just go. And so I did. I made it to the top of the slide the wrong way. As soon as I got to the top, I heard some lady start yelling at me. Some employee, she said, "What are you doing? Get down, you can't go that way." So I came down off the slide, and I looked over to my dad and my uncle for support, and they had just disappeared. They were just gone. I don't even know where they went. I found my dad later. I was like, what's the deal? He said, "Sorry, man, you shouldn't have broken the rules." So it's a funny memory. I like to give my dad a hard time about this, but I tell you the story because that's how influence often works. We're not always the ones who are going to experience the results of our influence. As people allow themselves to be influenced by us, they are the ones that are going to experience the fuller consequence of our influence, and that's going to be either for better or for worse. In his book called Integrity, Dr. Henry Cloud, he uses an imagery of a boat gliding across the surface of water to describe the impact that we leave on other people. The idea is that as we move through life, as we're interacting with others, each of us is leaving behind a wake, like the one you see here up on the screen. Just like a boat can't pass over this glassy water without leaving some kind of wake, we can't pass through the lives of other people without leaving an impact on their lives. And the wake that we leave behind, it's something that has the capacity to do a lot of good, or it can do a lot of harm. Dr. Cloud, in his book, he asks the question, he said, "Would others say that their experience with us has left them better off for our having moved through their lives? Or would they say that it has left them worse off? Did they consider it to be a blessing that they were associated with you, or a curse? What is the nature of the wake? Are they smiling or are they reeling?" In biblical terms, we could maybe rephrase this question. We could ask, what does the wake that I'm leaving behind, does it reflect Christ? Does it build people up? Does it point them to Jesus, call them to be like Jesus? Or, on the other hand, does it distort the image of Christ? Does it create confusion about who he is? Does it tear people down? Does it make it difficult for them? Does it hinder them from following Jesus? Now, the reality is, and we need to acknowledge this, that we all leave a mixed wake at best. Back to my dad, the Discovery Zone story, that's really an unfair portrait of the wake that my dad has left on my life. As I consider the wake that my dad has left and is leaving in my life, I would say that as a whole, I would describe it as something where he has pointed me to Christ. He has challenged me to be like Jesus. Of course, he's got his flaws. Every son knows the flaws of his father, but as a whole, that's the mark that my dad has left on my life, challenging me to be like Jesus and calling me toward that. And that is something that we want others to say of us as well. Each one of us wants others to say that of us. Starting with our inner circle, think of those in your family. You want them to say that of you. Those your kids, your parents, your spouse. And then moving out from your family to those at church, out into the work environment, into every arena of life. That's the kind of impact that we want to leave behind, the type of wake we want to leave. And so to explore how we can do that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Old Testament character of Nehemiah. Nehemiah's wake is one that we are still talking about today. And so we're going to observe some of the things that he did to grow his influence and then to use his influence. And we're going to try to understand the biblical principles that are behind his actions so that we can apply them to our lives as well. But in order to understand, in order to tell Nehemiah's story, there's some historical background that is needed. And so what I want to do is I want to cover 200 years of history in 2 minutes and do that by looking at 3 kings. So here we go. We're going to go through 3 kings and 200 years real quick. The first king is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, he was the king of the Babylonian Empire, and in the year 586 BC, he destroyed the city of Jerusalem, and he destroyed the walls, the temple, and what he did is he took God's people who were living there, and he deported them. He took them away and brought them out into exile. And then we have Cyrus. Cyrus is the king of the Persian Empire, and in the year 539 BC, the Persian Empire conquered and took over the Babylonian Empire. So God's people were still in exile at the time, but when Cyrus came into power, what he did is he allowed them to return. He allowed many of them, they returned, they went back to Jerusalem, and they rebuilt parts of the city, they rebuilt the temple. And interestingly, this is something that God had said 150 years earlier would happen through the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah 44:28, God said, this is 150 years before people knew who Cyrus was. He says, I am the Lord who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid. So God said it would happen. Surprise, it actually happened. Fast forward 90 years to the year 445 BC. The new king of Persia, the Persian Empire, is Artaxerxes. This is an image that is believed to be an image of him on his tomb. And so I think that's kind of interesting. But he was the king for a long time. He had a long reign. And 20 years into his reign is when Nehemiah enters the picture. Many of God's people at this point, like we said, had returned back to Jerusalem, but not Nehemiah. Nehemiah had stayed in the capital city of the Persian Empire, and he was working there in service of the king. And one day while he's working there, some visitors come from Jerusalem to Nehemiah with some news. And here's what they say. They said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are destroyed by fire. So Nehemiah hears this news, and the news is basically that Jerusalem still lays in ruins. It looks like there may have been some attempts at some point to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, but if there had, those had clearly failed. And what this meant is the city was just exposed to attack from all sides. But beyond that, it also represents their shame and kind of symbolizes the disgrace of the city of Jerusalem. And this must have been news to Nehemiah, new information, because here's his reaction. He's crushed by the news, And then he goes into this earnest and heartfelt prayer. He concludes his prayer by asking God to give him favor with the king so he can ask the king for permission to go back and rebuild the wall. And here's how his prayer ends in verse 11. He says, "O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, in the sight of the king. Now I was cupbearer to the king." So this line here at the end is interesting. It seems kind of random, like a random tag on where he says, "I was cupbearer to the king." But this is a significant thing. This actually tells us a lot about the kind of man that Nehemiah was. This is the image that comes to mind for me when I hear the word cupbearer. I don't know about you, this is what comes to mind. But Nehemiah, he was no snooty British butler. To portray him as that, to think of him as that, really doesn't do justice to what he actually was and what his role was. In reality, he was more like head of secret service for the king. He was charged with guarding the royal chambers. And the reason he's called a cupbearer in the first place is because it was his job to taste the king's wine to make sure that it wasn't poisoned. And so this meant that he had to be the most trusted man in the king's security detail. The king had to have absolute faith. He had to know that Nehemiah didn't have a price at which he could be bought to slip some poison into the king's drink. So this was a position of influence with the king, and it was really a position of honor as well. It wasn't the kind of job you got just out of high school. This was a serious thing. And so the only way that Nehemiah ascends to a position like this is through a track record of consistent and powerful demonstrations of faithfulness. That's the only way that he got to be there. Without faithfulness, Nehemiah's story, it doesn't get off the ground. And the same is true for us. Influence for Nehemiah, influence for us starts with faithfulness. That's the foundation that we're going to look at today. It starts with faithfulness. Faithfulness, it lays the foundation for our influence. Jesus taught this. Jesus taught that faithfulness is really the proving ground where we qualify ourselves for influence. Jesus said this in Luke chapter 16. He said, "One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches?" So faithfulness, it kind of is something that builds like a flywheel. It gains momentum. When you're faithful with a resource, you demonstrate that you're qualified to have more of that resource. And then when you're given more of that resource, you have an opportunity again to demonstrate more faithfulness and qualify for more. And so with influence, when you're faithful with a little bit of influence, you're given more, and that builds over time. This is how people gain momentum and influence over the course of a lifetime. But how does this faithfulness flywheel get started? Well, our passage tells us it starts with the little things. As we observed, every resource that we're talking about, every other one that we've talked about in this series, we've talked about stuff, time, and our body. These are all temporary things. And this places them squarely in the little category. People, though, on the other hand, people are eternal. People are different. They're like nothing else that God created. They are the much. They are the true riches. And so if you want to grow in true riches, if you want to grow in influence with people, step one is to take the comparatively small assignments that God gives you seriously. It would actually, if you think about it, it would actually be a very bizarre thing for us to be stingy or to be wasteful with our time, with our money, with our body, and then still expect God to entrust us with more influence with his most valued resource. It would really be an audacious thing. It would be like a young man saying, "You know what? I know I have no self-control with my time and with my money, and I know I have no self-control with my body, but I'd really like to date your daughter." What would you even say to that other than no? No, that's not going to happen, bud. I don't think so. But as a father of 3 daughters, I'll tell you, I do pray that one day God does bring a young man into each of their lives who is faithful in those lesser things, and who can be trusted, someone that I can trust to care for and to influence my girls. That is actually something I want for my daughters. And in the same way, God is looking for men, he's looking for women who will be faithful with the little things so that he can give them the far greater privilege of influencing his children. That is something he wants for you. That is something he wants for his children. So back to Nehemiah's story. Nehemiah, he prayed boldly, and he leveraged his position boldly. He went to the king, he used his position of influence, and he asks for permission to go back and rebuild this wall. The king, he grants permission. Not only that, he agrees to fund the whole project. And so Nehemiah, he sets out, he travels back to Jerusalem, and when he's there, he's kind of preparing how he's going to organize the people, how he's going to go about this massive project of rebuilding this entire wall around the city. But before he can get started, word leaked out, word spreads about what he's up to, and some of the leaders of the surrounding cities, they find out what's going on, and they really don't like it. So we can read their reaction. Here's what it says. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Amorite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. So these guys, they had their reasons for opposing the wall. The main reason is that they wanted Jerusalem to be weak. They wanted Jerusalem to be a non-rival. They didn't want the competition of a strong Jerusalem in the region. But note what it is that specifically displeased them here. It says they were displeased that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people. It doesn't say that Nehemiah came to build a wall. It doesn't say that he came to accomplish a task. It says that he came to seek the welfare of the people who were there. Isn't that interesting? And that's exactly what he did. He landed there, and he immediately went to work on behalf of the people. And it turned out this drew a very sharp contrast between Nehemiah and the leaders who had come before him. There's this really interesting verse in chapter 5 of Nehemiah talking about the leaders who had been assigned to the region before he got there. And here's what it says. It says, "The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God." So this is interesting. As a representative of the king, Nehemiah, he had the right to tax the people. That was something he was entitled to. And apparently, these previous governors that we read about, they had done that, and they had done that to the extreme. They had done it to the point where they leveraged their positions, not for the benefit, not for the welfare of the people. Their positions, they were leveraging it to enrich themselves. That was the point. And they had done this to the point where even their servants were gloating, and they were lording it over the people, as it says. But Nehemiah says, "But I did not do so." They can do that. I did not do that. Why did he not do that? Because of the fear of God. And we talked about this concept of the fear of God a couple weeks ago. We talked about how it means that we fear God means that we take him seriously. We take him seriously enough to actually do what he says. And so Nehemiah took God so seriously that he refused to put his own interest ahead of the people, even saying no to what he was legally entitled to. And this is our second building block here. If you want to be a person of influence, seek their welfare. Seek their welfare. If you want to get, keep, and grow your influence, if you want to leave behind a meaningful wake in people's lives, learn to seek their welfare. Now, I want to show you in a second a clip from the show Band of Brothers. In this clip, you've got, this is on the eve of D-Day, is what this is taken from, and you have Lieutenant Winters. He's talking to Lieutenant Compton. Lieutenant Compton is a newly arrived officer, and they're talking about how Lieutenant Compton has been gambling with the men who are under him. So let's watch this.
It's not like, you know why they volunteered? So when things got really bad, the man in the foxhole next to them would be the best. Not some draftee who's gonna get him killed.
Are you ticked because they like me? Because I'm spending time to get to know my soldiers? I mean, come on. You've been with these guys for what, 2 years? I've been here for 6 days.
They're gambling, bud.
So what? Soldiers do that. I don't deserve a reprimand for it.
What if you'd won?
What?
What if you'd won? Never put yourself in a position where you can take from these men.
Well, this scene is really well written. If you watch Band of Brothers, the show, there's a lot of actually great leadership lessons buried in there. But what Winters is impressing on Compton in this series, or in this scene rather, is don't even put yourself in a position. Don't even flirt with putting yourself in a position where you might end up benefiting at the expense of your men. And the principle for us, the thing that we can capture from Nehemiah is that if people even suspect that you are out for number one, if people, their spidey senses start going off, and they start realizing, hey, I think he might be more interested in his own welfare than he is in my welfare, then that's something that's going to have a corrosive impact on your influence. The Bible records a story where Jesus' disciples, they were getting into kind of an argument about which of them was going to be the greatest, which of them was going to have the most authority. It was kind of a petty argument, honestly. But in this squabble, Jesus saw a teaching moment, and here's what he told them. He gathered them, it says, he called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. But not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant." Gentiles here, this is shorthand for those who don't fear God. And Jesus is saying, don't be like them. Don't be like this. And this is nearly the same language that we saw with Nehemiah in chapter 5. In fact, I want to put these two passages on screen so we can look at the parallels between them and compare. In both of these, we see that we've got the former governor for Nehemiah, and then we have the rulers of the Gentiles that Jesus is talking about. In both cases, these are those who don't fear God. And what do? Well, they lord it over others. They seek their own welfare to the point that they're just boasting about seeking their own welfare. And then we've got a sharp contrast. The sharp contrast is with those who fear God. Those who fear God. And for them, we have, "But I did not do so," Nehemiah, with Jesus, "but not so with you." God's message is clear, and it is consistent in Scripture that if you take me seriously, you've got to be different. If the whole world wants to seek their own welfare, if they want to clamor and climb on top of each other to get ahead, well, that's their business, but not so with you. For you, I want you to adopt the posture of what? Of a servant. Seek their welfare first and seek your welfare second. For me, this is an area where God has had to smack me upside the head a couple of times in my life. I would say that the most memorable smack occurred about 8 years ago. At the time, I was at a church, the church I was a member of before coming to Seabreeze, and I had an opportunity to sit down with the pastor of that church and kind of talk about some of the direction for my life. And the conversation went somewhere that I didn't expect it to go. He looked at me and he said, "Ethan, you know what? You've got a lot going for you, but you've really got to learn to love people more." And then he basically went on to tell me that I was likable but selfish, and that if I wanted to have an impact on people, I needed to trouble myself less over my own welfare and start troubling myself over theirs. And that, I will tell you, was a difficult conversation. Those were tough words to hear, but I'm grateful for them. And as I've sought to address this area in my life, there's one practical thing that I've done over the years that just seems to move the needle in my heart, to have a practical change in my heart more than anything else. And that is just simply to pray. To pray for someone else's welfare. If you want to seek someone's welfare, pray for their welfare. This has two effects for me. One that it has is it changes my heart. As I pray for their welfare, I actually begin to care more about it. And then two, it allows me to hear from God about practical ways that I can seek their welfare. Sometimes what happens is I'll be mid-prayer for somebody and I realize I just have to stop praying because God has given me something so specific and so actionable that praying about it doesn't make sense anymore. I've actually got to go do it. And usually it's something small. It might just be picking up my phone and I'm sending them an encouraging text for their welfare. Or I'm checking in on them about something hard that they're going through. Sometimes it's just unloading the dishwasher. It's small stuff, but it really moves my heart. So if you want to grow in influence, pray for people and seek their welfare. As we return to the story, we see Nehemiah. What he does is he pulls together the people. He begins to cast a vision for a rebuilt wall and get people on board for that. He organizes them. He gives them assignments to specific areas, specific jobs to work on, and then the work commences. And the more plausible this project becomes as it moves forward, the more opposition the project begins to incur. So, led by Sanballat, the guy we met earlier, this swelling coalition of adversaries from the surrounding cities, it begins to emerge and grow. And really, they have two tactics. First, they try more of a psychological approach. They try discouragement. They try mocking the project, and they try to basically deflate the workers, deflate the people so that they give up. It's not worth it. And then when that doesn't work, they resort to the threat of an armed attack. They say, we're going to attack you and kill you. So that's their backup plan. Nehemiah, he took that threat seriously, which I think is a good move. But rather than stop the work, what he did was something interesting. Instead, he had every man just wear a sword while he worked. He armed the men, had them keep working, but with a sword at their side. And so if a man was carrying a load with his left hand, in his right hand it says, well, he had his sword right there with him. Here's what we read in chapter 4. It says, so we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon in his right hand. So what's significant about this? What's significant here is that Nehemiah is on the wall with them. We read, we labored at the work. He's not asking them to sweat over something that he's not willing to sweat over himself. And then we read, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon in his right hand. He isn't asking them to bleed. He's not asking them to risk their lives and to bleed for something he's not willing to risk for and to bleed for himself. And so the lesson here is clear. If you want to influence others, if you want to leave a good, positive wake in their lives, you've got to be prepared to set the pace. And that's our building block number 3, is to set the pace. Something that you probably don't know about me is that I have the habit of whistling around the house. Okay, so I'm around the house, just kind of all day long. But I am a hypocritical whistler. Okay. By that, I mean that it just really bugs me when other people whistle. My dad grew up, he would whistle around the house. Maybe that's where I got the habit. It would drive me crazy. Somehow my kids all learned how to whistle at these freakishly young ages. It's like you can't walk, but you can whistle, and it just drives me crazy. And so I'm always telling people to stop whistling. But nobody takes me seriously in my house when I do this, because I'm doing it myself. And so what happens is I'm just kind of a joke. They'll maybe stop whistling because I'm their dad and they don't want to get a consequence, but they do it knowing, okay, Dad, whatever you say. And then 2 minutes later, I'm subconsciously whistling myself. So this is an area where I have zero moral authority in my house because I don't practice what I preach. There's no consistency between my word and my actions. And then for something small like this, I think maybe we can say that's okay. We can laugh it off as a bit of a quirk, especially if there's goodwill in the rest of the relationship, which I think in this case there is. But for bigger things, the consequences aren't quite so trivial. You probably know also that my role here on staff is family pastor. And I realize, though, you may not know what that actually means. What that means is that I work with other leaders, I oversee other leaders to do anything related to the kids ministry here, the junior high and high school ministry, or the college ministry. And so one of my annual tasks is that I will sit down with Tutor Marisi, who's our student pastor with the junior high and high school, and we will consider who we want to invite to be a volunteer for the Seabreeze student ministry in the following year. And there's a lot of things that we consider when we're doing this. Obviously, if you're going to work with the teenage demographic, you need to have high energy, you need to be able to keep up and things like that. But the most important thing that we consider is who is setting the pace. Who's out there setting the pace? Because there are certain values that we want your teenagers, we want to partner with you to help your teenagers adopt these values from the Bible. And we know that we can talk about those values from a stage over in the student building until we're blue in the face. And the truth is, it will have some impact. But what will really make an impact is if we can find people of integrity who are already living out those values in their real lives. And if we can get those people around the students, well, that's what's really going to make a major impact. That is what has potential to make a huge impact in a teenager's life. This is true at the Seabreeze student ministry. This is true in your house with your family. This is true with the people you know at church. This is true with the people you know at work. This is true in all areas of life. If there's alignment between your words and your actions, that can have a very powerful impact. But the opposite is also true. Nothing will neuter your influence like a discrepancy between what you say and what you do. Now, I do want to clarify on that this is not to say that perfection is required for pace setting. It certainly is not. It's actually in our failure and in our weakness where we have the opportunity to make some of the greatest pace setting impact. I had a boss, one of the guys who I would say has left the greatest wake in my life. He was a Christian boss, and he wanted to set an office culture of clearing up relationships, where if you did something wrong to somebody, you would actually clear that up and ask forgiveness. And so what that meant for him is that if he ever did something wrong, you could bet he was going to show up at your office door, he was going to knock, and he was going to come and tell you, hey, I did this specific wrong thing. Will you forgive me for that? And sometimes it was a one-on-one, but sometimes it was with a whole group. If he had done something wrong in front of a whole group, then the next time that meeting, that group of people got together, he would say, hey, this is what I did that was wrong. I need to ask your forgiveness for that. And so what happened was, in this way, even in his failures, he was modeling Christ, and he was setting the pace. Okay, so back to our story. The walls, they're rising, and as the walls continue to rise, opposition for it that we've already seen is rising with the walls. At the point when the walls were finished, but the gates hadn't yet been set, it kind of got a little desperate. The attacks did. They got a little desperate. They shifted from more general in nature to more personal in nature. They stopped targeting the project as a whole, the people as a whole, and they zeroed in on the man, Nehemiah. So the more that his influence grew, the more Nehemiah had this growing target on his back. The opposition was more after him because by taking out the man, his enemies knew that they could take out the whole project. And so what they did is with one hand, they offered him false friendship, and they pretended to warn him of conspiracies that really, in reality, didn't exist. And then with the other hand, they plotted their own actual conspiracies, and plotted plans to ambush and kill him. And so in the middle of these threats, here's what Nehemiah said. He said, "For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking, their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands." So as his influence grew, Nehemiah didn't forget that God was the source of his success. The attacks came. His reaction was to do what he had done all along. He turned to God for help. He turned to God for strength. And for us, this is the final lesson that we're going to draw out of Nehemiah's story. Building block number 4 is to stay close to God. Now, I know for a fact that many of you in this room are doing the things that we've talked about, those points, 1, 2, 3. I know for a fact many of you are grounded in faithfulness. I know that you're seeking the welfare of others, that you're setting the pace, and that your influence is growing. I know that because I've seen it and I've witnessed it. And this means that for you, there is a growing target on your back, just like with Nehemiah. Satan opposes everything that God does. He opposes God. He opposes everything that God does. And so if you're being used by God to influence others, he has much more reason to pay attention to you than if you would just mind your own business and seek your own welfare. In fact, if you're minding your own business, seeking your own welfare, he doesn't really have much reason to pay attention to you at all because you're already doing exactly what he wants you to be doing. But if that's not the case, and you are growing in influence, you've probably felt this growing target on your back. If this is the case, it's not time to panic. It's not time to retreat. Instead, it's time to just double down on your need for God, to stay close to God. This is what Nehemiah did. We can recall the first thing he did when he found out about the wall of Jerusalem was pray to God and ask for influence with the king. God gave him influence with the king and continued to give him more and more influence. As his prayers were answered, it would have been really easy for him to think that this was his own doing, that it was his own charisma or leadership skills that were accomplishing this. But instead, what he did at the beginning, at the end, everywhere in between, is he recognized that God was the one who was providing his strength. He had a pattern of humbly seeking God and seeking God's strength. Like he says, "But now, O God, strengthen my hands." He ended up completing the wall in only 52 days, which was pretty astonishing. He accomplished the incredible task, but what's really noteworthy for us is he accomplished the task without burning people in the process. He actually did the opposite of burning people. He actually made their lives better, and he connected them to a significant work that God was doing. And in this way, he left an incredible wake behind him. God wants the same thing for us. So as we wrap up, I want to encourage you to consider 2 things. I want to encourage you to consider the who and the what. The who is, who does God want me to influence? Maybe it's an individual, maybe it's a group. But as you think about the who, I would encourage you to think about the closest to home who. Not the who that is far away, but the who that you interact with every day. Who do you interact with in your home, in your family? Who do you interact with those 1, 2 steps out that God wants you to influence? And then what is one action I can take to improve the wake that I leave in their life? How can I build that person up? How can I reflect Christ? How can I draw those people, challenge them to be like him? Let's pray. God, we recognize that when you give us influence in somebody's life, that is not something that you take lightly. I pray that we would not take it lightly either. I pray that you would help us to see it the same way that you do. I pray that that as we consider others, that we would step back and ask, what are you doing in their life? And how can I help advance that forward? God, I pray that you would help us to have the character to leave a good wake in the lives of those around us. And God, I pray that where we are not pace setting, where we are not seeking others' welfare, or where we've strayed from closeness to you, God, that you would give us, you would just nudge us, tap us on the shoulder, and show us specific ways that we can turn back and be right with you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.